Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to Stanley-Whitman House. My name is Andy Versosa. I'm the executive director here. So we are so happy to have Lucinda Bliss here for her exhibit. And I have a few words to share with you. Stanley-Whitman House is a living history center and museum with programs, events, classes, and exhibits that encourage visitors of all ages to immerse themselves in history by doing, acting, questioning, and engaging. While the museum is a place that is tied to Farmington's colonial past, this area has been inhabited for thousands of years. We are a recent addition to the long history of the many people who lived here. I would like to read our land acknowledgement. We at Stanley-Whitman House acknowledge that we are situated in the homeland of the Tungus people, who later invited the Mohegan, Wangunk, Quinnipiac, and other displaced Native people to join them here. Today, 5 nations, the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Shaktaco, and Golden Hill Pecusset, and their descendants of other Native peoples continue to serve as stewards of this land. With this acknowledgement, we recognize the legacies of settler colonialism, and we signal ongoing commitment to building relationships with the indigenous communities who have lived on these ancestral lands for almost 15,000 years, and to the future nations. Exhibitions and programs like today's would not be possible without the support of members, including our corporate sponsors. The Alma Bailey Taylor Trust, the Northwest Bank Community Foundation, Ion Bank Foundation, Sanford and Hawley, Budwitz and Meyerjack, and J. Dalal Associates. And most importantly, this exhibit would not be possible without funding from the Directors Resource Fund. And that money this year was provided by an anonymous gift. Stanley-Whitman House hosts a variety of programs and events throughout the year, and I would encourage you to go to our website. It's S as in Sam, W as in Walter, H as in house.org, s-wh.org. It's so easy, and I would hope that you would visit our website and see what we do. And I'm just very excited to have Lucinda here, and we've known each other a long time, and I invited her here, and I'm going to let her tell the story. If you need backup, I'm going to just be over there. Before I give it over, I just want to introduce Christy Matthews. She's going to just talk a little bit about membership here at the museum.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for making it out in our great New England weather here. My name is Christy Matthews. I handle advancement here at the museum, which includes membership. Just looking out in the audience, do we have any members here? Please raise your hand. All right. We're always looking for members. We have various levels, so if you'd love to be a part of our organization, please talk to me before you leave today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christy. And again, thank you guys for coming. Who here drove here and lived out of state? Doesn't live in Connecticut, drove here today?
Wow.
Wow. So for our benefit, for Lucinda's, we have a guest book here in the Welcome Center. Please sign the guest book and let us know where you came from. And then after the reception, I'll be in the historic house talking about the historic house, as well as the work that you have in the house. But and after this talk, there'll be light refreshments in the Whitman Tavern. Thank you.
I knew I was going to cry. My wise son Ray said, just relax and enjoy it. And it's like, I am, and I'm crying. Honestly, like if you all knew who was in the room, you would be blown away. So as you're meandering after this, like, say hello to a neighbor, because, I don't know, we could do some significant work in the world with just the creative and mind power in this room. So I do want to say, and given that, I could spend a half an hour just saying thank you, like around the room to every single person, but I think you want to hear a little bit about the work. I do want to say thank you to a few people who actually had hands-on support with the work. Really important to acknowledge the people whose hands helped make the thing. And as most of you know, I have a big job at Mass Art. I'm an associate provost and dean of graduate studies, so making my work is like, it takes a lot of scrap and persistence to keep at it. So the people who support me and help me mean a lot. First one, Rebecca Morrison, who is all the things, like all things digital and photographic. You'll learn in a few minutes sort of why the work required me getting, developing more facility with digital media and work with photography. And she's an amazing teacher and a person I work with at Mass Art. Raymond Bliss, who did so much beading. If you haven't been to see the installation yet, you'll understand that he is a master beader and did many, many hours of beading. Rick Chalmers, who isn't here, helped me source, I would call him and say, I need warm looking wood that's really rough, and it has to be about these dimensions. And he was like, but helped me to manufacture these and come up with a structure that was going to get at the drawings and the sort of meaning I had in mind. And of course Andy, who's, I'll say a little bit more about that, but man, he has really rolled with it over the last 2.5 years when it took me a while to find there's so much heady, so much that could have just been a conceptual academic project. And I think it was the sort of challenging dialogue back and forth, like in the best way, that sort of helped me to find it and helped Andy to see how the work would live in this space and why that was important. Spring 2020, you guys remember what was going on? The pandemic, our lives changed dramatically. That's when I got this message from Andy inviting me to come visit the museum, and they also oversee the Memento Mori cemetery that's just down the road. So in July of that year, I came down for a first visit, and Andy's known my work for a very long time, many years, and was aware that, as many of you know, for probably 12, maybe more years now, my work is in part based, it's always place-based, but started to be bound to my life as a runner, and I would get to know place in a tactile way by movement with my body around particular plots of land as a way of sort of marking their meaning, exploring their designated use, and sort of adding that to the sort of library research that would always be a part of it as well. So that was just the beginning, because as we started talking about what kind of a project I might do at the museum, I learned about 58 previously unknown letters written by Nathaniel Hawthorne's son, Julian, to Marion Morton, who's the daughter of William Morton, and Elizabeth Whitman, who's the namesake of the museum. This is a little aside, but just inviting people to this show, I learned that one of my closest friends from college is a descendant of the Whitmans, so she's going to come in a couple months, and who knows what we'll unpack from that conversation. So the possibility of a research and navigation project started to take root, but I was also eager to spend time with Julian's letters, both from the perspective of being a direct Hawthorne descendant, holding those letters in my hands, but also from the perspective of my interest in post-colonial studies. My Hawthorne lineage, if you're curious, is on my mother's side and tracks back to William and John Hawthorne in Salem, Mass. In the 1630s. As some of you may know, Nathaniel Hawthorne added the W, actually re-added the W, it was there previous to the other Hawthornes, changing the spelling of his name to differentiate from the Hawthornes, those early settlers who were responsible for some of the darkest cruelties of the Puritan era. So then Julian and his wife Minnie Amelin had 7 surviving children, one of whom was Imogen. Imogen and William Champion Deming had 5 children, one of whom was my grandpa Benton, my mom's. I do want to give a little plug that my mom has a new book out called A Woven World, and if you're interested, she's amazing, and we have a pretty incredible collaborative dialogue with one another, and that book has a lot of the same sort of weave that you're talking about and that I'm talking about in a visual way, so pick it up. Thank you. So spending time with the letters was an opportunity to learn insights about my own family history, but more important, they would be a vehicle for thinking more broadly about narratives of American history and the archives that hold them, about the things and narratives that are kept, and then those that are discarded and buried. I'm grateful that Andy and the Stanley-Whitman House, and the researchers, the board, I've had great conversations with a lot of people connected to the museum, that they've been receptive to the changing nature of the project. In the end, the work is deeply site-specific. It's an intervention in and dialogue with a museum devoted to protecting colonial settler artifacts. But what's different here is that most American museums and archives, in spite of the efforts at decolonizing collections and curricula, have a narrow, self-congratulating mission and message. The Stanley-Whitman House is an example of a small historical site that's committed to simultaneously preserving and complicating that history, excuse me, by acknowledging the shadow narratives implied in its very existence. So my work in the museum started as a writing project, but over time my art had just took over the studio work, I had to go there. I started to navigate running around Farmington, particularly around the river's edge, thinking about the human relationship to the land and the river and how it had shifted over the centuries, thinking about when it was the Tungsis River around 1000 to how things changed with the early colonial English settlers in the 1640s when the land started to be cut up into parcels. I became interested in the early maps of Farmington and spent some time in the Farmington Library. They have a great archive, and sort of flipping through, I found what looked like an early town ledger, like tax documents or something. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I was shocked to see the surnames of Williams, Stedman, and Deming. My father, who's also here, is a Williams. His mother was a Stedman, and you've heard of the Deming connection. Clearly thinking about the colonial era in Connecticut and in Farmington in particular was to think about my own genealogy. And actually, as an aside, those of you who are from this area, I would visit my father in the summers at his parents' house, which was on Harris Road in Avon, and I remember that as a beautifully rural place. My dad would go fishing in a little stream, which you can't even find anymore because it's all cul-de-sacs. But the ways that place kind of lives in your cells. This place, still the smells of the pine trees over there evoke it, even if the landscape looks radically different. I'm sure you have places like that in your history as well. So I started drawing, adding elements from early maps that I found in the Farmington Library, loose graphics describing Round Hill, the planting fields, the river, and you can see in some, I'll point some of this out after, but we'll look after, I think they're in the other room, but those of you who are familiar with those maps, I know there's some very deep researchers in Farmington history, you'll recognize those early articulations. I've sort of appropriated those in some of the early drawings. But it was when I found an old Currier and Ives calendar in my studio, a calendar that had been my grandmother Trevilla's, that my work finally found its purchase. I found what the thing was, and it took me like a year and a half to get there. You probably know Currier and Ives, the printmaking business. They were in New York, the original hand-painted lithographs. I think they started making them in the 1830s and that wrapped up in like 1910, maybe a little earlier than 1910. And then they were reproduced for decades as the Traveler's Insurance calendars. And actually, I just discovered the other day that you can still buy them. Like, it's Americana that still obviously has some purchase in the world and means something to people. So they depict American events, Americana, often from that time, fires and other catastrophes, history. I gotta say that when you start going down that rabbit hole, some of them are so disturbingly racist. It's like incredible that they became so common. I mean, and then of course sexist. But a lot of them are just, they seem innocuous on first glance. But as I began to collect them, and I really had to collect them, like for Manifest Cows, I needed cows. So it's like, I need 5 more pictures of cows. So I was like, I destroyed eBay with my search for cows in Currier and Ives calendars. So as I started to collect them in order to cut and reassemble them into new narratives, I increasingly saw the ways that the popularized Americana perpetuated a narrow nationalistic view of the country. They illuminate much about the values and ideals of America in the 19th century. Ideologies like manifest destiny, that white Americans were destined to settle, by God, destined to settle the entire continent. So I also just want to say a little bit about a second collage form I mentioned earlier that uses digital methods to blend imagery. I'm actually going to just, because I'm standing here and you're there, I'll point this out because I think when you're looking at the show, it's an important moment. This was one of the first collages that I did, and it was when I went to photograph it, was taking it off the wall, that I realized that the back of it was something that was part of the work. And because I'll say a little bit more about this in a minute, but I'm interested in analyzing the way that meaning is created in artistic images. It was a way to sort of analyze the thing and then move that into the space of a new work. So of course I needed to learn how to do digital manipulation, which if you haven't done it, you think, oh yeah, it's Photoshop. No, it takes like a year. But fortunately I had Rebecca to guide me. So when I developed that second way of working, I started incorporating in some of the digital pieces, early property maps. The ledger I mentioned is copied into some of the drawings. Drawings of colonial era ships, photographs of the body and the landscape, and text literally from the Julian Hawthorne letters that I found, that were found in the museum archives here. So the work in this show is designed to unpack. I've always been interested in trying to say as much as I possibly can with the leanest possible language to unfold if you give your eyes and a little time to it. I don't want to go too heavily into explaining the work. It's like almost as bad as reading a PowerPoint. Just stand here and interpret it for you. And I want you to bring your reading to it. I honor your reading of the work, and I know I'll learn new things about it as I hear your response to it. I do want to underscore a couple important themes. Art and language are the vehicles through which we tell our stories. It's a beautiful and inspiring part of being an art historian, a literary historian, a writer, an artist. To study human history through the study of our artifacts. At the same time, it's important to point out that there are histories, mythologies, and images that have been endlessly repeated and elevated, while others that don't fit the dominant narrative have been buried. This work aims to engage those themes and narratives and ask, how is a woman in the landscape usually depicted? There are a few nudes that you'll see that are intended to engage with that question. Where in the composition of a painting do Indigenous people usually show up? Not the focal point. What does a depiction of a grand, wild, untouched landscape inspire in us? What is it supposed to inspire in us? I'm almost done. What is the intended meaning in illustrations of colonial ships traveling across a rough sea? What stories aren't being told? What images aren't included in those images? I also want to say that in the end, the work is about our relationship with the land. My work is always about that. Colonialism is a history of our relationship to the land, and this body of work is a conversation with that. Thank you. I want to say hello to all of you. We can just gab about the work as much as you like. I'm happy to answer questions if you have them right now, or maybe you want to get a glass of wine or something. Bill, any urgent comments, questions? Then
I don't even know how to begin to ask this. Are the collages are the things applicated on, or is it a picture of the collage that, because there's this digital process?
Yeah, one of the things that interests me is that you can't tell.
Yeah.
And, I'll tell you that almost every single image has my hand in it.
Yeah.
And usually it's a lot.
Yeah.
And when I use the digital image, it's like a substructure. It's basically questioning what is the ground. And this is such a bunny trail, but I've thought for many years about language, how language exists in us, defines us. In the 90s, I was so into French feminist philosophy because it was like what's written on the body, how does language sort of prop up our identities, and it's weird that idea is still showing up in my work in sort of new ways, what is the structure on which we're building the images, sort of asking that and then doing it, So, yeah, this is all work of the hand, and then, you see that, it's like I'm sort of questioning what these little Americana caricatures of what it was like for women to be strolling through with their gardening, buckets through the, and then what's happening to the environment, they're placeless, it's like we're in this space where what are we doing, it's like we seem so self-involved as a culture that we can't see that we're destroying the environment. And then this is again another example. There's just two of them that, it's the back side of the piece. So that's the print, and then this is all hand drawn and collaged on top of it.
So that means that you photographed the back, turned it into an image, and then worked with that.
Yeah, the turning it into an image was the challenging part, and then turning it into that, printing it.
Yeah.
Printing it and then, collaging on it.
I like it.
Lucinda,
Hi,
so
Jen.
wonderful to be here. Do you want us to, do you advise looking at it in a particular order? Is there like an unfolding story?
Yeah, in a way. You heard me say a little bit about how the work progressed. I've really tried to, two things I'd say. I've really tried to show process. I think, actually, Andy and I had a great opportunity to do a radio program this morning, and I had this thought that it's I'm just so fortunate to have this work in this space, right? You sort of imagine, I'm getting the Chelsea show. I'm this is, this is the space of this conversation. And partly because of audience, right? It's the people who are going to see this are people who are really used to those sophisticated people, in the art world, but also folks who are going to come in, they're interested in history, and it's going to be what? So with that in mind, I've included a lot of the sort of process in the room. So there's some drawings in the other room. There's some, to sort of just put a finer point on the connection to the landscape. There are drawings of passenger pigeons and indigo in that room. So I would say start in there, maybe take that in, get a little snack, a glass of wine, and then check this work out, and then maybe go in and see the installation. There are a few pieces in the main room as well. And then the installation work is in the actual colonial house, so maybe do that last. I feel really great about that work in there. It looks amazing.
So it's all in this building.
It's all in this building, but this is the contemporary. Is that what you call it, Andy?
It's the center. It's the center. So for housekeeping, just know that when you go into the historic house, do not bring food or drink in, and do not touch anything or sit on anything or lean against anything. You can't breathe in there. but seriously, just be very, very careful. It's a house that was built in 1720, and I took the stanchions out. I wanted people to get close, but I don't want them to touch everything. So keep that in mind. I do have a little service announcement. Someone has a gray BMW that's parked in front of our neighbor's driveway across the street. They're very upset. They would like you to move your car, please.
Yeah.
That'd be very nice, thank you. But just in terms of walking around, I'm going to be in the historic house for a lot of the time and can answer questions. And
there are little models in there of the. There are little models in there of the installation pieces, which are, it's a look, don't touch situation of those two. But Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so when you say historic house, is that
Oh, yeah.
the big house? At the-
It's the
No,
big-
it's in this building, but you just have to go that way into the original structure,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so there are a lot of goodies in the other room, in the Whitman Tavern. Please eat that up so that I don't have to take it home. That'll be nice. Any, want to take a few more questions before people?
I think someone over here had a question and then we.
Oh, I was just wondering if this is a new style of art for you. Is it,
Yes, I've done some collage, but never like a body of work in collage. I feel like I've always had a little bit of it going on the side, but yeah, where it really seemed like, you know, I love collage. There's like, I used to teach a class many years ago called Art and Irreverence. And a segment of that was like, looked at feminist art, looked at street art, but it always started with looking at Dada. And how collages manifest during that time. You think about, it's the greatest way to teach social context, you know, in terms of understanding artwork. You think about World War I, the emergence of the prosthetics industry, it's like, what were people seeing at that time? Bodies being taken apart. It was like the world being taken apart. And so to cut things up and reassemble them is to question its meaning, you know, like that history is rooted and deep. So, you know, I think for artists to always like claim your lineage, you know, like your points of influence, and I would say that's been a point of influence for a long time, but never like, you know, inspired a whole body. Yes.
Lucinda?
Yeah.
So in this whole introduction, you only use the word indigo sort of in passing. As we look through it, will it make more sense, or will we?
Okay, so, yeah, you're gonna see it. You know, there are depictions of indigo plants in the other room. When you see one of the installation pieces, the tail end of the rope is dipped in indigo. It's a noun that gets, it's a noun, it's a plant, it's history, it was a currency, it was, you know, where's the woman who has this history from South Carolina that the invention of indigo as a dye might have actually been done by a slave. Then, of course, the slave owner taking credit for it. Like, there's indigo the thing. It's a really cool sounding noun. I love the plant. It has echoes in the work. And it's like a metaphor that unpacks the way I like my work to unpack. Like, it can do so many things for you as a word. So, does that make sense? It's a word that does a lot. I like a word that does a lot. Cool, well, I'm around for the rest of the afternoon, so.
So I want to talk to you.